Have you ever considered the sheer, almost unfathomable complexity involved in orchestrating global compliance? We're not talking about simply influencing opinion, but actively shaping belief and behavior on a worldwide scale, subtly yet, well, profoundly. It's a question that for many probably conjures images from, I don't know, dystopian fiction, right? But today we're embarking on a deep dive into a profoundly detailed and, frankly, pretty chilling thought experiment that attempts to lay out precisely such a blueprint. Welcome back to the deep dive. Our source material for this intensive exploration is an article titled How to PsyOp the World into Compliance, and it's penned by two meticulous researchers, journalists, authors, Peter Duke of thedukephoto.com and George Webb of joshwebb.substack.com. What makes this particular article so compelling and, so crucial for our deep dive today is its audacious premise. It meticulously outlines a multi-stage hypothetical blueprint for what the authors describe as a superstate actor to achieve global compliance. And the chosen vehicle for this grand objective? A simulated pandemic. The core concept, as Duke and Webb articulate it, it sort of revolves around using biology not just as a medical phenomenon, but as a sophisticated vehicle for the carrot and stick tactic. Their blueprint details the employment of fear-based operant conditioning to enforce the acceptance of injections and, quite starkly, a widespread, deeply personal violation of bodily autonomy.
It's a truly intricate and, thought-provoking scenario they lay out. Peter Duke and George Webb have meticulously constructed this hypothetical model that, while, unsettling, it offers some profound insights into the potential mechanics of large-scale social engineering. Our mission today is really to methodically unpack this elaborate thought experiment, moving through each stage step by step. We'll be extracting the most important insights, the surprising facts perhaps, and the deeper implications that the authors present. We want to help you understand not just what they propose, but the intricate how and why they believe such an examination is critical for, understanding our world. It's definitely a challenging topic, but one that I think demands careful consideration. Let's begin.
Okay, let's really unpack this core premise because it truly is the foundation, isn't it? The foundation upon which this entire hypothetical scenario rests. Duke and Webb first identify who they believe could orchestrate an operation of such monumental global scale. They refer to this entity, or maybe this constellation of entities, as a super state actor, and that this isn't just one single shadowy organization, but a broad, deeply interconnected network. Can you walk us through the specific components and connections the authors suggest might be involved in such a network? It's quite an extensive list they provide.
Yeah, it is. And what's truly striking, and maybe most unsettling here, is the sheer scope and interconnectedness of this superstate actor as described by Duke and Webb. It's not presented as like a singular, easily identifiable villain in a spy novel, Rather, it's presented as this complex, multi-layered web of influence operating at the highest echelons of global power. The authors are quite explicit, listing what they consider its foundational components. They start with the Crown Empire, which they immediately specify as the financial powerhouses of the City of London and Wall Street. From there, they broaden the scope to include its successors, USA, suggesting a continuity of power and influence through different geopolitical eras. And then they identify key agents like the Five Eyes Alliance. That's the intelligence cooperation between Australia, Canada, New Zealand, the UK, and the US, and Mossad, Israel's national intelligence agency. So this already paints a picture of state-level intelligence and significant financial might.
And it goes even deeper than that, doesn't it? It seems to reach into ostensibly independent global institutions as well.
Precisely. That's where they list this formidable array of assigns, which they suggest function as the operational arms or influential partners of this hypothetical superstate actor. And this includes highly recognized global entities that shape policy, economics, social agendas. The United Nations, UN, the World Economic Forum, WEF, the Council on Foreign Relations, the Royal Institute for International Affairs, the Bilderberg Group, the Trilateral Commission, the Fabian Society, the Military-Industrial Complex, the World Health Organization, WHO, and even the Vatican. So the implication from Duke and Webb's perspective is a network so vast, so deeply entrenched, and so interconnected across finance, intelligence, politics, even religious influence, that it could hypothetically coordinate an effort of truly global scale, touching virtually every aspect of human society. It's a sobering vision of power concentration they're describing.
That's an incredibly comprehensive and, powerful network they outline. It paints a picture of deeply entrenched, cross-cutting power structures. So, with this kind of hypothetical orchestrator at the helm, what is the ultimate objective of this elaborate operation as described by Duke and Webb? What are they trying to achieve through this simulated pandemic, according to their analysis?
Well, the grand goal, as presented in their article, is remarkably specific and, frankly, profoundly disturbing. It's to gain widespread acceptance of a regime of injections, conditioning the global population, with very few exceptions, to accept a violation of their most private domain, their own body. So this objective moves far beyond just, behavioral compliance like adhering to laws or social norms. It delves into the realm of profound personal autonomy, targeting the individual's most fundamental right to control their own physical self and its potential subjugation to an external authority. The authors argue that this isn't just about public health in their view. It's about a deep, systematic conditioning to fundamentally alter humanity's relationship with its own body and with authority.
And here's where it gets really insightful, I think, because the authors highlight a central, almost cynical irony in how this compliance would supposedly be achieved. They refer to it as the classic carrot and stick tactic, right?
Mhm.
That twisted into a very manipulative dynamic. Can you describe this ironic carrot and stick dynamic that they meticulously detail? What makes it so potent in their hypothetical?
Yeah, the irony Duke and Webb pinpoint is indeed profound, and it speaks to a deep psychological manipulation as they see it. In this hypothetical scenario, the carrot, right, the promised reward for compliance, is nothing less than protection against death. However, the stick, the existential threat that makes this protection seem so desirable, is presented as originating from the very same people who are threatening to kill all of us, or so the authors allege. This establishes a deeply insidious and, well, self-reinforcing dynamic. From the author's perspective, the superstate actor allegedly creates the pervasive existential threat, the simulated pandemic, and then immediately offers the solution, the injections, thereby positioning themselves as the indispensable saviors from a danger they themselves supposedly orchestrated. This isn't just about offering a solution, according to them. It's about manufacturing the problem to control the response. It's designed, they argue, to create a situation where compliance isn't just encouraged, but becomes an absolute, immediate imperative for survival. All under terms dictated by the orchestrators, effectively short-circuiting critical thought and rational evaluation.
That brings us directly to the core mechanism they propose for achieving this widespread compliance, operant conditioning. We often hear this term, particularly in psychological contexts, but maybe remind us what operant conditioning truly means, and then elaborate on how this hypothetical plan applies it, not just to an individual, but like on a global scale. We're talking about a kind of Pavlov's dog experiment, but, for the entire world's population, in their view.
Right. Operant conditioning, at its core, is a type of learning where an individual's behavior is controlled by the consequences that follow it. It's about strengthening or weakening a voluntary behavior through reinforcement rewards or punishment. Think of B.F. Skinner's experiments with pigeons or rats, learning to press a lever for food, that kind of thing. Now, in this hypothetical scenario described by Duke and Webb, the authors explicitly identify mortal fear as the primary measure of success and the central mechanism to direct human behavior. The goal is to achieve this profound acceptance of bodily violation through injections. The theory they put forward is that by continuously associating the perceived overwhelming threat of death with the solution, the injections populations would be conditioned to accept these interventions without question. It becomes almost an automatic fear-driven response. This is analogous, as you said, to Pavlov's famous experiments, where dogs were conditioned to salivate at the sound of a bell after repeatedly associating the bell with food. Here, the bell is the omnipresent fear, and the salivation is the conditioned acceptance of injections, according to this model. This strategy, applied globally, aims, in their view, to fundamentally alter individual and societal responses to perceived threats, potentially eroding critical thought, fostering dependency on the perceived saviors, and ultimately overriding fundamental considerations of bodily autonomy under immense psychological pressure. It raises an important question, I think. What does it say about human vulnerability and the power of fear when such a scenario, however hypothetical, can be so meticulously outlined?
So, if fear is indeed the ultimate control mechanism and the objective is such a deeply personal form of compliance, the next logical question is, well, how do you even begin to prepare billions of minds, a global population, for something like that? The article delves into this, introducing a critical discipline the authors call epiwar, or epistemological warfare. What exactly is epiwar, as defined by Duke and Webb, and how does it play into this incredibly long-term strategy of preparing the global mind for such a profound shift?
Epawar, or epistemological warfare, as Duke and Webb define it, is far more subtle and pervasive than traditional military conflict. They describe it as the deliberate use of language, symbols, and narrative structures to shape perception, distort reasoning, and control knowledge frameworks, often by exploiting deletions, distortions, and generalizations to erode critical thought and redirect belief. What's truly insightful here, and maybe most unsettling, is how EPIWAR, in their view, isn't just about winning an information battle in the short term. It's about subtly and methodically eroding the very capacity for independent critical thought over generations. It's about priming populations to process reality in a specific way, making them receptive to fear-based narratives long before any actual crisis even emerges. It's presented as a truly long game of cognitive conditioning. The authors emphasize that this isn't a quick tactic. It requires years of media saturation to prepare a global audience to be frightened of an invisible enemy. They even boldly state that the Crown Empire has been at this game for a long time, implying a long-standing generational effort to shape public consciousness.
That sounds incredibly long-term and pervasive. It suggests a very patient, strategic approach. How does this EPIWAR manifest in practice, particularly concerning the propagation of ideas? The article mentions transmedia meme spreading. What does that involve, and what specific kind of fear is being spread here to lay this groundwork, according to them?
Right, transmedia meme spreading. In this context, it refers to the propagation of ideas, themes, or narratives across multiple media platforms to saturate public consciousness and influence perception. It's not just about, say, a viral video, though that could be part of it. It's about a consistent message, like the idea of an invisible, rapidly spreading threat, or humanity's vulnerability to unseen forces being reinforced again and again. In news, movies, social media, maybe even academic discussions, all contributing to a shared pervasive understanding, or maybe a shared fear. The key focus here, particularly in this initial battlefield preparation stage they describe, is spreading fear of all kinds, especially from invisible or unknown entities. Hunt White. So according to them, this isn't about conditioning people to fear a specific virus yet. It's about cultivating a general sense of unease, a generalized vulnerability to unseen ubiquitous dangers. This process, they argue, effectively primes the collective psyche to be on constant alert, making populations far more receptive to a future-specific narrative about an invisible, pervasive threat like a novel virus. It creates a psychological environment where fear is not just a response, but a pre-existing condition, just waiting to be triggered.
That makes a lot of sense, doesn't it? An almost foundational level of conditioning. And Duke and Webb go even further, suggesting that our popular culture has been playing a profound role in this conditioning for over a century. They cite numerous literary and cinematic examples that have embedded contagion as a recurring narrative engine. Let's really dive into some of these because they're quite striking in how they collectively, as the authors put it, collapse the border between entertainment and societal mind control. It's almost as if fiction became the training ground for our collective unconscious, in their view.
Indeed, the depth of this cultural conditioning aspect is one of the most compelling and meticulously detailed parts of their analysis. They suggest that long before any actual or simulated pandemic, the groundwork for public perception was laid in our stories. They begin way back with Mary Shelley's The Last Man from 1826, a truly visionary work that imagined nothing less than the collapse of civilization itself, brought about by a global pestilence. This wasn't just a story. They argue it imprinted the idea of disease as an existential threat capable of ending humanity. Then you have Edgar Allan Poe's The Masque of the Red Death from 1842, which didn't just depict plague, but gave it an allegorical, theatrical, and inescapable stage, highlighting human vulnerability and, well, the futility of escaping disease.
And the timeline continues, right? Through the late 19th and 20th centuries, becoming even more direct and scientifically plausible, even when still fictional.
Exactly.
Yeah.
H.G. Wells, in The War of the Worlds from 1898, anchored the theme of disease in popular culture in a really profound way, according to Duke and Webb. Humanity wasn't defeated by Martian technology. Instead, the mighty invaders succumbed not to our weapons, but to Earth's unseen microbes.
Right, I remember that.
This solidified the narrative, they suggest, that biological agents, however small, could be the ultimate world-altering force, a powerful and invisible equalizer. These early works, penned long before microbiology was fully understood, really started embedding the idea of contagion as a powerful, world-altering, and often unseen force in the collective imagination.
And then, as science fiction became more sophisticated, so too did the depiction of these plagues, I suppose.
Absolutely. Richard Matheson's I Am Legend from 1954 really elevated the stakes, didn't it? Tying vampirism to a pandemic plague that transforms humanity, blurring the lines between horror, sci-fi, and societal collapse. The impact was so significant that it was adapted multiple times into iconic films like The Last Man on Earth, The Omega Man, and the more recent I Am Legend. Each adaptation, the authors would argue, reinforced the terrifying vision of a world irrevocably altered by disease. Then, Michael Crichton's The Andromeda Strain in 1969 introduced the terrifying concept of extraterrestrial viruses and laboratory accidents, the idea that disease could be both alien and man-made.
Yeah, the lab leak idea.
Right, and that our scientific efforts to contain it could be tragically flawed. This, too, was adapted for the screen, bringing those specific fears to a wider audience. And finally, they mentioned Stephen King's The Stand from 1978, which for many became the definitive archetype for a weaponized superflu, portraying a near-apocalyptic scenario and humanity's desperate struggle. These works, Duke and Webb suggest, didn't just entertain, they created a deep cultural lexicon around disease, shaping how generations would conceptualize and react to a global health crisis.
So it's not just pure fiction either, according to them. The article points to nonfiction also playing a crucial role in this ongoing conditioning.
Yes, they specifically highlight Laurie Garrett's The Coming Plague from 1994. This nonfiction work, a serious examination of infectious disease, is cited by Duke and Webb for allegedly making clandemics everyday suspense, further blurring the lines between what we perceive as entertainment and what they suggest could be societal mind control. The cumulative effect of all these narratives, stretching back over 2 centuries, is presented as hypothetically conditioning public perception. It's a process, they argue, that makes societies intrinsically more susceptible to fear-based messaging during a real or, crucially, a simulated pandemic. It's a gradual desensitization, maybe, and familiarization with the concept of a global, invisible enemy, subtly preparing the mind to accept extreme measures. And speaking of chilling historical anecdotes, the authors even mentioned Prince Philip Mountbatten's famous stated wish to be reincarnated as a deadly virus. In the context of this thought experiment, that detail adds, well, a layer of historical commentary to the idea of biological threats being linked to powerful figures, suggesting a long-standing fascination or understanding of the potential impact.
Okay, so with the global mind hypothetically prepared through decades of epicwar and cultural conditioning, the next crucial step in this elaborate operation, as outlined by Duke and Webb, is about controlling the narrative itself. They call this setting up epistemological fallback positions. What's the fundamental purpose of these fallback positions, and how do they propose using misinformation, disinformation, and malinformation to achieve this strategic control?
Right, this stage, controlling the narrative, is really about creating a robust, almost impenetrable defense for the primary narrative, according to their model. Epistemological fallback positions in the author's analysis are essentially pre-planned alternative narrative variations. They're designed to provide plausible, albeit conflicting, explanations for the same sets of facts. Their primary tactical purpose, Duke and Webb suggest, is to flood the zone with misinformation, disinformation, and malinformation.
Flood the zone. Okay.
This tactic is specifically deployed, they suggest, when independent researchers or critical thinkers start to uncover inconvenient evidence that might contradict the primary, officially sanctioned narrative. The goal is to overwhelm the information space so much that it becomes incredibly difficult for the public to figure out what's true and what isn't. By introducing multiple, seemingly plausible but ultimately diversionary narratives, the orchestrators, in this hypothetical, can effectively muddy the waters, sow confusion, and ultimately discredit any independent research or alternative viewpoints that challenge their official story. It's presented as a sophisticated strategy for actively controlling the entire information environment, not by suppressing all information, but by drowning out inconvenient truth with a deluge of plausible fictions.
That sounds like a very sophisticated and layered form of deception, almost like an intelligence operation designed for public consumption. The article uses a specific term for this, parallel constructions. Can you define that for us? And then maybe give us some of the concrete examples of these fallback narratives that the authors present. How would these different stories function as parallel explanations for the same initial event?
Yeah, parallel construction. It is indeed a term from intelligence practice, and it's particularly insidious in this context as they describe it. It's defined as an intelligence practice of fabricating multiple, compartmentalized cover stories around the same operation. The core idea is that even participants within the operation, or maybe senior officials, might believe they have the whole truth. Well, the true overarching objective remains hidden within this complex web of mutually reinforcing fictions. In the context of this hypothetical pandemic, Duke and Webb provide several specific examples of these layered deception narratives, each ready to be deployed. For instance, if a new illness emerges, one narrative might be zoonotic bat virus, another lab leak,
Right, the familiar
a
ones.
third wet market, and maybe a fourth Chinese bioweapon attack. They even include more outlandish ones like monkeys escaping from trucks.
So each of these narratives offers a different origin story, but they all still point to the existence of an illness, right?
Exactly.
Right.
That's the key. Each of these disparate stories offers a seemingly plausible explanation for the occurrence of the illness, but they divert attention from the true in this hypothetical orchestrated origin. These varied narratives, according to the authors, could be strategically deployed to cover for global transnational deployments. If evidence surfaces pointing away from one explanation, another is readily available to take its place. This creates an echo chamber, of conflicting but equally official-sounding stories, making it nearly impossible for the public to identify a singular, verifiable truth. It's presented as a genius, albeit terrifying, tactic for managing public perception and deflecting unwanted scrutiny.
So where would these elaborate scenarios, these intricate narratives, and their corresponding fallback positions actually be developed and war-gamed? The article points to some very well-known and influential institutions, doesn't it? And they also introduce a concept here called goal stacking. What's that about, and how does it fit into the broader strategy?
Yes, the authors are quite specific about that. They identify prominent think tanks and academic institutions as potential venues for developing and meticulously wargaming these complex scenarios. These include institutions renowned for strategic thinking and influence, RAND Corporation, the Tavistock Institute, the Fabian Society, Cambridge University, and even Event 201 at Johns Hopkins University. And notably, Duke and Webb point out that Johns Hopkins, the host of Event 201, was founded by members of Skull and Bones, suggesting maybe a deeper generational lineage to these types of strategic planning exercises, in their view. These institutions, in their hypothetical framework, are presented as the intellectual incubators where such complex, multi-layered operations can be conceived, refined, and tested for various contingencies. And within these intricate planning stages, they introduce goal stacking, which is a really insightful concept they bring up. It's described as a planning strategy where single solutions are optimized not only to provide cover for existing operations, but also to simultaneously serve as significant profit centers.
Ah, okay. Multiple birds with one stone.
Exactly. So it's not just about achieving one objective, it's about achieving multiple mutually beneficial objectives with a single action or policy. This could involve, for example, a public health measure that simultaneously serves to advance the primary compliance goal, generate revenue for involved corporations, and maybe solidify political power. It's about maximizing beneficial outcomes, financial or otherwise, from every facet of the operation as they see it.
That's a truly powerful and, yeah, rather cynical combination: strategic deception, layered narratives, and financial gain all intertwined. And tied into this elaborate narrative control, the article introduces the concept of crisis actors. How do these individuals fit into this narrative control and goal stacking strategy, according to Duke and Webb?
Right, crisis actors. They're defined quite specifically as individuals hired to play roles during staged or simulated emergencies. In this hypothetical scenario, Duke and Webb suggest these individuals could be pre-positioned with pre-planned books ready for store shelves as the New York Times bestseller list.
Yeah.
This connects directly to both goal stacking and narrative control. Imagine a crisis unfolds, and simultaneously, books by experts or survivors emerge, perfectly timed to shape public understanding, generate sympathy, and reinforce the desired narrative. By having pre-vetted individuals ready to become these authorities or witnesses with ready-made stories, the orchestrators, in this view, could further shape public perception, create emotional resonance, and profit immensely from the manufactured crisis through book sales, media appearances, and other engagements. It's presented as a way of manufacturing credibility and narratives from multiple angles, ensuring that the official story, however complex or contradictory, has a human face and a tangible presence in the public consciousness, all while potentially generating profit for the involved parties. It's a chilling integration of media, finance, and psychological manipulation they describe.
Okay, so we've discussed preparing the global mind through epicenter and cultural conditioning, and then building an elaborate system of narrative control and fallback positions. Now let's get to the hypothetical disease itself, which the authors term the disease vector. What precise characteristics would this cover story disease need to have for this entire multi-stage operation to work as described in Duke and Webb's article?
Okay, the hypothetical disease for the cover story. the one that creates the public perception of a widespread pandemic. It had very specific and strategic requirements, according to Duke and Webb. It didn't need to be more impactful than a common cold, they say, but it required airborne transmission to spread efficiently, and it had to be incredibly contagious.
Highly contagious, but maybe not that severe.
Exactly. The ultimate aim here, they propose, was not severe illness for everyone, but rather widespread detection. Eventually, everyone in the world needs to test positive, regardless of whether or not they present as ill. This is crucial because it creates the illusion of a pervasive, inescapable threat, driving that fear response globally. And critically, they state, efficacy or lethality was not required, as deaths were to be applied tactically. This implies a widespread, relatively benign pathogen just to generate ubiquitous positive test results and general illness. This provides a broad narrative backdrop for more targeted and devastating interventions to follow.
That's a clever way, in a dark sense, to ensure global spread without needing active, overt deployment in every corner of the world. But if this primary cover story disease isn't necessarily lethal on its own, how would the mortality aspect be introduced and controlled? This is where a truly innovative and, well, unsettling concept of virus-like particles, or VLPs, comes into play. The authors describe these as a game changer. What exactly are VLPs, and what makes them so tactical and central to this hypothetical plan for introducing targeted lethality?
Right, the VLPs. This is really fascinating and a key innovation in this hypothetical blueprint they've constructed. A VLP, as described by Duke and Webb, is a biological technology that can make people sick but cannot be transmitted from an infected person to another. Think of it like a virus's empty shell. It has the outer structure, it can interact with your cells, maybe trigger an immune response or cause illness, but crucially, it lacks the genetic material to replicate itself or spread from person to person.
So it can't spread like a normal virus.
Exactly. And that single characteristic fundamentally changes the game for tactical deployment, according to their analysis. Unlike traditional bioweapons, which they say require tremendous maintenance, cold chain infrastructure, complex delivery systems, VLPs are described as dry, relatively impervious to temperature and humidity variations, and can be deployed in a variety of methods. This means they wouldn't need expensive cold storage, complex handling, or a vast network for distribution. They're presented as robust and easily transportable.
Okay, so robust and non-transmissible. How would these VLPs actually be deployed in a tactical, controlled way then? What kind of methods are we talking about for distributing something that makes people sick but doesn't spread person to person, allowing for that precision?
Well, the article provides very specific and quite alarming examples of VLP deployment methods. They suggest techniques such as saturating air conditioning, HVAC, filters in subways, hospitals, shopping malls, and retirement homes.
Through the air vents.
That's the idea. This allows for highly localized infection targeting specific populations or buildings. The immense advantage of this, which the authors emphasize as battlefield control, is that unlike traditional bioweapons, which can spread uncontrollably once released, they use Lyme disease as an example, with VLPs, all deployments are contained and tactical. The only people affected are the people in the targeted geolocation. You could, in theory, cause illness and even death in a specific building, a floor, or a community without the disease propagating uncontrollably beyond that precisely defined point. This provides, in their hypothetical, an unparalleled level of control over the perceived spread and severity of the illness.
And the article points to a historical precedent for using HVAC systems in this way, suggesting that this isn't an entirely new or theoretical concept, is it?
Absolutely. The authors reference a particularly relevant historical event, a Pentagon HVAC release that took place in August 1949. This was explicitly described as the U.S. Army Chemical Corps Special Operations Division's first vulnerability test. In it, operatives sprayed supposedly harmless bacteria into the building's air handling system just to track dispersion.
Wow, back in 49.
Yeah.
Oh.
This historical event is presented by Duke and Webb as powerful evidence of early knowledge and the practical use of HVAC systems for biological dispersal. It suggests that the concept of using such a building infrastructure for targeted dissemination of airborne agents is not just theoretical, but has been explored and tested by state actors decades ago, which of course lends a chilling plausibility to this aspect of Duke and Webb's hypothetical scenario.
This brings us to what the authors call the sword, the most unsettling and perhaps most ethically fraught part of the hypothetical operation, tactical mortality. We've established that VLPs can make people sick but aren't transmissible from person to person. How does this critical characteristic allow for what Duke and Webb describe as precision lethality and the crafting of specific mortality narratives designed for maximum fear?
Well, the non-transmissible nature of VLPs is precisely what makes them so incredibly tactical for creating localized high mortality rates, according to this model, all without the inherent risk of broader, uncontrolled contagion. This allows the orchestrators, in this hypothetical, to exert an almost unprecedented level of control over where and when deaths occur. For example, the authors suggest a horrifying scenario. A retirement home could be targeted with a tremendously lethal VLP like anthrax with a near 100% mortality rate.
Oh,
And the disease will not propagate outside that retirement home. This precision, they argue, enables mortality narratives to be crafted to create newspaper and television stories with the maximum amount of panic-inducing fear. Imagine localized clusters of severe illness and death, each generating dramatic news coverage, creating a public perception of an omnipresent, deadly pandemic, while the actual lethality is contained and controlled to specific targeted populations. The deaths are concentrated, dramatic, and newsworthy, but entirely controlled, which helps to accelerate and drive that operant conditioning we discussed earlier, associating widespread fear with the existential threat.
so it's not just about one disease or one vector, it's a carefully orchestrated combination. The article describes this as a 1-2 punch strategy. Can you explain how this synergy of vectors works to achieve both widespread illness and tactical localized mortality while maintaining absolute narrative control?
Yeah, the 1-2 punch strategy is presented as the core of this hypothetical master plan, a powerful and deeply cynical combination designed for maximum impact and control. It involved two distinct yet synergistic vectors as they lay it out. First, the strategic global distribution of a non-fatal but highly communicable cold virus. That's the widespread pathogen we discussed, designed to generate those widespread positive tests and general less severe illness globally.
The cover story.
Right, the cover story creates the broad narrative of a pervasive, unavoidable global pandemic. This widespread illness is then combined with a tactical implementation of lethal VLP variants for controlled, localized mortality. The genius of this, from the perspective of the hypothetical orchestrators Duke and Webb describe, is that it provides organized narrative control. They can generate widespread fear from the perception of a pervasive, deadly disease, thanks to the cover story virus, while simultaneously, and with extreme precision, controlling where and how many people actually die, thanks to the VLPs. This dual approach allows them, in theory, to maximize the fear factor, create dramatic news cycles around specific mortality events, all without ever losing control of the battlefield or risking the collateral damage of a truly uncontrolled bioweapon.
That's incredibly intricate. A truly complex choreography of biological agents and public perception. And this narrative control extends even to what medical institutions would actually be testing for. The article suggests a deliberate misdirection here. What would medical professionals be looking for, and crucially, what would they not be looking for in this highly controlled scenario?
Right. In this hypothetical, medical institutions would be deliberately misdirected, operating under a partial understanding of the situation, according to the authors. They will be testing for and getting positive results back for the non-lethal variant. They will not be testing for the VLP vectors.
Okay, so only testing for the cold.
Exactly. This is presented as a key operational detail because it means that while the widespread cold-like illness is confirmed everywhere, the actual highly lethal VLP variants responsible for localized deaths remain undetected. The VLP vectors themselves, Duke and Webb point out, could be a smorgasbord of different variants, including bat viruses, swine flu, bird flu, Ebola, AIDS, anthrax, and any number of vectors that are to be tested, leading to varying levels of lethality and symptoms in the targeted populations. So the medical community would be identifying the widespread, non-lethal cover story illness and attributing all symptoms and deaths to it, while the actual varied causes of severe illness and death in specific locations remain hidden. This contributes to the confusion, the narrative of a mysterious and unpredictable disease, and ultimately the pervasive fear.
That's a significant and pretty unsettling detail, suggesting a profound lack of transparency within the medical system itself in this scenario. And the article describes an even more advanced method for deploying these VLPs using something called nanoferritins and even, astonishingly, airport body scanners. How would such a futuristic and, well, deeply invasive system hypothetically work to activate illness?
Yeah, this takes the tactical deployment of biological agents to an entirely new, almost science fiction level within their thought experiment. Nanoferritins are introduced as a mechanism to attach VLPs to iron. This allows them, hypothetically, to remain inert inside people who have been exposed to the VLPs until the nanoferritin heats up.
Inert until heated.
Kind of like a microscopic time-release capsule or a tiny dormant biological trigger that's only activated when a specific energy, like heat, is applied. This suggests a frightening capability for delayed or remotely controlled activation of illness. The article then explicitly points to Leidos body scanners with millimeter wave radar, like those installed by TSA in every airport in America, as a device that could heat up nanoferritin VLPs.
Seriously. The airport scanners.
That's the suggestion in the article. This offers a truly astonishing hypothetical capability for delayed activation of illness or lethality, potentially triggered as individuals pass through security checkpoints. It implies that exposure could occur at one point, and the onset of symptoms or even death could be activated much later, at a strategically chosen moment or location, making tracing the true origin almost impossible and creating an even greater sense of unpredictable vulnerability.
Okay, so if disease patterns are being tactically controlled with localized lethality and this widespread non-lethal variant, there might inevitably be inconsistencies in how the illness spreads or affects different people. How would public health measures like mask wearing and social distancing play into explaining away these anomalies, according to the authors?
Right, those public health measures. In this hypothetical, they wouldn't just be about disease control. They would serve a crucial function as part of the parallel construction, a crucial cover story. Duke and Webb suggest that mask wearing and social distancing could be encouraged precisely to create a parallel construction, a cover story that can be used to explain why some people are dying while others have a sore throat.
Ah, so explaining the discrepancies.
Exactly. This helps to address and rationalize inconsistent disease patterns that would inevitably arise from localized VLP deployments mixed with the widespread but benign cover story virus. If one community experienced high mortality while another nearby only had mild symptoms, the official narrative could attribute it to differences in mask compliance or social distancing adherence, right? This provides a seemingly logical, universally applicable explanation for the observed disparities in symptoms and outcomes, reinforcing the primary narrative of a globally widespread but somewhat unpredictable illness that requires strict adherence to public health measures, irrespective of actual biological transmission patterns in this scenario.
This level of detail in the hypothetical plan, integrating social behavior, technology, biology, it's truly astounding, and it even extends to specific drugs. The article highlights the drug remdesivir, not just as a treatment, but as a dual-purpose weapon in this scenario. What are its two proposed roles, one protective and one potentially devastating?
Yes, this is presented as a particularly cynical and strategic proposed application of a pharmaceutical drug within their hypothetical. Remdesivir, in Duke and Webb's analysis, is given two distinct, critical, and almost contradictory roles. Firstly, they state that remdesivir, when used prophylactically, can prevent infection when it's administered before someone gets sick.
Okay, protective for some.
Right. This would be ideal, they suggest, for assets. For example, the operatives discreetly installing contaminated HVAC filters or deploying VLPs, people involved in spreading lethal VLPs. It allows them to protect themselves from the very bioweapon they're supposedly spreading, ensuring the orchestrator's operatives remain safe and operational. It's presented as an internal control mechanism for the operation itself. Secondly, and perhaps more disturbingly, the article states that remdesivir also causes high mortality in many who get the drug after they have become ill, delivering the added benefit of spreading mortality and fear.
Causes mortality after illness.
That's the claim in the article. In this hypothetical, it suggested that medical professionals operating without full knowledge of the VLP deployments and at a loss to discover the cause of their patients' illnesses might recommend extreme remedies, like ventilators and remdesivir. Unbeknownst to them, these treatments, particularly remdesivir according to this source, could then inadvertently contribute to the tactical mortality and fear, being mistakenly attributed to the severity of the primary cold-like disease rather than the specific unacknowledged VLP or the treatment protocol itself. This creates, in their view, a tragic feedback loop where medical efforts intended to help could ironically advance the goals of the hypothetical operation.
And beyond the direct effects of the drug, the article suggests that financial incentives could be used to significantly inflate mortality rates and further manipulate the situation. How would this financial aspect work to drive fear and, as the authors starkly put it, cover up genocide?
Yeah, this aspect of the hypothetical plan points to a deep and disturbing corruption of the medical system, all for the purposes of the operation as described. In this scenario, medical professionals operating under the pervasive narrative of a deadly pandemic could be directed to code stipulate the diagnosis to collect insurance money,
Hmm.
as the non-lethal variant, which they erroneously assume is lethal,
Toting for the wrong thing.
thereby elevating public fear to a greater level.
Mm.
This would inflate the perceived danger of the widespread, less severe illness, creating an exaggerated sense of crisis based on misdiagnosis, potentially driven by financial gain. Furthermore, and even more alarmingly, the authors detail how hospital administrators can be incentivized to encourage medical professionals to administer sometimes lethal protocols with financial bonuses from emergency legislation, encouraging attribution of lethal outcomes to positive test results from the non-lethal diseases.
So bonuses for certain protocols or diagnoses.
Exactly. Imagine a system where hospitals receive higher payments for certain diagnoses, or for patients on specific high-cost protocols like ventilators or receiving certain drugs. This creates a perverse incentive structure, they argue. Duke and Webb's conclusion here is stark and truly chilling. By this method, mortality rates for the non-lethal disease can be inflated, and financial incentives can be used to cover up genocide. It describes a system where financial gain aligns directly with increasing fear and, potentially, with concealed deaths, creating a terrifying feedback loop where profit and perceived public health intersect in a deeply manipulative way, according to their analysis. #outro.
Wow. We've just navigated a truly comprehensive, multi-layered thought experiment meticulously presented by Peter Duke and George Webb in their article, How to PsyOp the World into Compliance. We've explored their hypothetical blueprint for achieving global compliance through a simulated pandemic, starting from the decades-long psychological conditioning of populations, moving through the tactical deployment of specific disease vectors, and culminating in the chilling manipulation of medical systems and financial incentives to control both narrative and perceived reality.
Yeah, and the value of such an in-depth exploration, as presented by these authors, lies not in, endorsing the scenario as fact, but in understanding the complex mechanics of how such a hypothetical operation could be conceived, designed, and implemented. It forces us, I think, to confront the critical thinking required to navigate a world saturated with information, where the line between objective reality and carefully constructed narratives can become profoundly blurred. By dissecting this intricate blueprint they've laid out, we gain, perhaps, a deeper appreciation for the multifaceted nature of influence and control.
And on that note, Duke and Webb's article itself hints at a part 2. It promises to explore remarkable coincidences that reveal key figures in the medical narrative who, for some reason, hold patents on HVAC technology. What might the significance of such detailed coincidences be if this incredibly intricate hypothetical scenario, this deeply unsettling blueprint, were ever to move beyond the pages of a thought experiment and, into practice? It certainly adds another layer of intrigue to their investigation, doesn't it?
It does, and that's maybe the provocative thought to carry with you as you reflect on what we've discussed today. We encourage you, our listener, to keep your minds open, to question assumptions, and to rigorously consider multiple perspectives when evaluating information, especially in areas where powerful interests might converge. It's really about empowering yourself to form your own informed conclusions based on thorough examination, no matter how complex or, frankly, unsettling the subject matter might be.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into Peter Duke and George Webb's compelling, if disturbing, research. We'll see you next time.
This is terrible. This is one of the worst catastrophes in the world.